You know, sometimes it just feels really good to hit something hard. So, I saw a few looks, but good afternoon. Thank you all for being here and welcome to the Rotary Club of Kerrville. This time I'd like to ask everybody to please silence your phones, but as you do so, check in and let the world know where we're at and what we're doing. This time I'd like to ask Mr. Mark Disdar to come up and lead us in our invocation and pledge.
Bow with me. Dear God, we're so continually blessed by you. We thank you for this group. We thank you for the fellowship. We thank you for the combined strength to give to others and to serve others. We ask for your continued blessings and wisdom and care and love and touch over those that are sad or afflicted today. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We got a real audience participation song today. So this is singing, you got to be able to clap. Gerald, how we coming? We're going to do, I couldn't find anything about radios to sing about. But so we're going to sing this Deep in the Heart of Texas. But there's what you got. The stars at night are big and bright. Okay, you got to clap. So here we go. The stars at night are big and bright. Deep in the heart of Texas, the Kerrville sky is wide and high. Deep in the heart of Texas, the sage in bloom is like perfume. Deep in the heart of Texas, reminds me of the one I love. Deep in the heart of Texas. All right, good job.
Thank you, George. Thank you, George. It's always fun to see the emails come across with you and Dave and everybody putting the songs together. So at this time, I'm going to ask Clint to come across and introduce our guest speaker today.
Thank you very much, President Jeff. As my introduction unfolds, you'll learn that today we are definitely going to be addressed by a true Renaissance man. Our speaker is an amateur radio operator who first was licensed 50 years ago. He became interested at age 12 and in his early teens was licensed. He went to undergraduate school at Georgia Tech and majored in physics. And then he went to University of Georgia Law School. And then, not surprisingly, wound up a patent lawyer because you've got to have a science or engineering background to practice in that area. He then worked for Schlumberger for 30 years before retiring to Kerrville with his wife of 46 years. They have 2 children. Now, here's where it really gets interesting. Dale enjoys getting on the air and communicating with other hams around the country and around the world. He is also part of a national group of ham radio operators who provide communications in the event of local, state, and national disasters or emergencies. Dale teaches classes for people wanting to get their ham radio license. He is the past president of the Hill Country Amateur Radio Club and has about 100 members. In addition to all this, Dale also enjoys amateur astronomy, woodworking, photography, travel, and composing classical music. So with that, I hope we're going to hear about maybe something near to me, and that is Morse code and whether it still matters. And so please join me in giving a warm Rotary welcome to our speaker today, Dale Gaudier, who will talk to us about amateur radios.
Thank you, Clint, and thank you, Rotarians, for inviting me here today. I'm very happy to be here. We need to switch out the presentation here. So I just need to bring it up on the slide deck. Yep. And full screen, and we'll be ready to rock and roll. Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you about amateur radio, and we call it amateur radio without boundaries. And in today's presentation, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what the hobby of amateur radio is all about. Sorry, I'm used to doing this in a courtroom, okay? You get to wander around, okay? I'll stay a little closer to the mic, sorry, you guys. So it's a little bit about what the hobby is about, who we are, what we do, why amateur radio is more than a hobby, and how to get started. And I'll leave time for some questions at the end. So.
Trying to make sure they see it online.
Yeah, okay, and is the clicker needs to work now. Yeah. Well, is this part working? Okay. So the imagine that you're 12 years old and listening to a distant AM radio station on an old tube type radio on a warm summer's night. And you remember those old tube radios, ones that glow in the dark, as we like to say. And then imagine that your radio has a dial marked shortwave, and you tune across it and hear stations from all over the world, such as the Voice of America, the BBC World Service, Radio Nederland, Deutsche Welle, and Radio Moscow. Now, imagine that you save up your allowance to build your own shortwave radio and discover that there are other people who can speak to each other across continents. People who call themselves amateur radio operators or ham radio operators. Then imagine as time goes on, you study and take a test and get your ham radio license and become one of these special people that can talk across the country and the world. That boy was me. That for me was the wonder and excitement of ham radio, a hobby for a lifetime and a hobby without boundaries. So let's talk for a minute. What is amateur radio? Well, you've probably heard it called ham radio, and that's what I'm going to refer to it mostly here. We don't know where the term ham comes from. It's lost in the mist of time. We do know that there were early experimenters trying to extend the reach of radio, even before the commercial interests such as Marconi and others came on the scene. Hams are amateurs only in the sense that we use our stations for personal pleasure and experimentation and public service, and not as business, as a business like a commercial broadcaster. So ham radio is non-commercial. It's a hobby, but a hobby, as I like to call it, with a purpose. There are many facets to this hobby, which I'll discuss a little bit later. Now, in the United States, amateur radio is regulated by the FCC. You have to have a license to get on the air. There are 3 levels of license, and the entry level is a very simple written test. All questions and answers are published. And the good news for a lot of you folks, if you're ever interested in getting a license, you don't have to take a Morse code test anymore. All right. Now, that's not to say that we don't use Morse code on the air. There's plenty of that going on. And we'll talk a little bit about, what hams do a little bit later. So who are we? Well, we come from all walks and backgrounds. We're young, we're old. We've had hams take the license test as young as 6 and as old as 99. All you basically need to do is be able to understand the questions and know the correct answers. Male and female, there are no boundaries in terms the hobby. Now, here are some statistics for you right now. Around the world, there are over 2 million amateur radio operators, 745,000 hams roughly in the US, and about 15% of us are women, including my wife and my daughter. They both have their licenses. They're located in virtually every country around the world, and it is a growing worldwide hobby. Now, there are some famous people who've been ham radio operators. You'll probably remember a few of these. Senator Goldwater, Marlon Brando, Howard Hughes, Donny Osmond, and Walter Cronkite. There's also some royalty. The King Juan Carlos I and the King Hussein, who's of course since passed away. And some are astronauts. The first man in space, Yuri Gagarin, and one of the first shuttle astronauts, Owen Garriott. And then we also have some that have been Nobel Prize winners, including one who's still very, very active right now, Dr. Joe Taylor, who has invented a very interesting digital mode that a lot of us are enjoying these days. So that's who we are. Now, what do we do? Well, there's many, many different facets to ham radio as a hobby. The foremost is the thrill of communicating with people around the country and around the world over the air. These could be friends of many years, or they could be complete strangers. Everyone's a friend on the air. That's really the rule that we all follow. We're all connected by our interest in radios, and we act as ambassadors of goodwill for our country. Now, it's not well known, but even during the Cold War, hams in the US spoke with hams behind the Iron Curtain, including Soviet Union, East Germany, and other places. So again, it was part of our goodwill to the world. So what do we do? Well, like I said, there's lots of different things. You can get on the air to talk to people, but there's also learning about electronics, electricity, and radio propagation. We love to build things. People like to build antennas or radios. And nowadays, a lot of folks are designing software to use with their software defined radios. A very important aspect, and one that I will talk about a little bit more, is we help our communities out in times of need. We are part of a group of trained communicators that can help the first responders when they need an additional channel of communications. We learn how to be efficient communicators, and we also take additional training to help support those first responders, particularly when their primary channels are down or marginal. Those of you who've been through hurricanes, as I have in the Gulf Coast, know that one of the first things that goes down are the cell phones. Even if the cell phone tower physically is still up, they're so overloaded with people trying to get on there, you can't talk to each other. So I've evacuated twice from Houston using my ham radio to be able to talk to other folks and find out what's the best route out, what's going on. And also if somebody is in need, like they need a gas for their car or extra water. So there's, it's that kind of training that we have that allows us to help out in times of need, and also having the right equipment. Now, hams love to get together on the air and chat. So that's part of our communications. We like to compete in contests. Believe it or not, a ham, we'll go out and we'll spend a weekend trying to contact as many different countries or people around the world. And so if those of you who've ever gotten into fishing, and fishing tournaments are a little bit like fishing, you're out there trying to catch something. You don't ever know exactly what you're going to catch. It could be a rare one, or it could be a lot of minnows, but It's part of the fun of trying to find, new countries and new people to talk to. And we also have an annual event that we call Field Day, where groups go outside. We get off the grid, so we're not plugged into anything. And we simulate a situation where we're trying to do relief operations and communications during a natural disaster. Now, many of us like to get together in local clubs where we meet and discuss various things related to radio. Some are general interest clubs, such as the Hill Country Amateur Radio Club, of which I'm the station manager and a past president. Other clubs are focused on other things that might be of interest to people, specialized types of communications, such as satellite communications. So ham radio operators actually own several orbiting satellites that we can use to communicate through devices similar to this. We can also speak with the International Space Station. So there's a lot of interesting aspects to the hobby. So what do we do? Well, we like to get together at these very large gatherings we call ham fests. Okay, some people like to go and see cars. We like to go and talk radio. So you might get tens of thousands of people showing up at these ham fests, and you get to meet your friends live instead of over the air. And there's equipment vendors and almost always a flea market where you can buy some items that you've had on your wish list for months. And of course, the real reason why we engage in a hobby is for fun. So in ham radio, it's part of the camaraderie. Why do you all get together here for luncheons at Rotary? It's you get to see your friends, you get to talk to them. It's the camaraderie, and that's a good bit of what ham radio is about. But our group extends not just to a room like this; it extends to the city, the state, country, and even internationally. And we also learn how to use our communication skills that can be put to good use during times of need. So there's also the thrill of talking to someone in a new country or in a remote location, such as Antarctica, Pitcairn Island. Everyone remember the mutiny on the Bounty? That's where the Bounty mutineers ended up, was on Pitcairn. And there's still amateur radio operators on there. And even the astronauts on the ISS. Almost every astronaut on the ISS and cosmonaut is an amateur radio operator, and they use it both for education and for communicating back to their families at home when they have some leisure time. We, as I mentioned earlier, with the right equipment, we can use satellites for communicating around the world, and some hams even use a very exotic mode to bounce their signals off the moon and communicate with people on the other side of the world. So it's a very interesting technical achievement. So we like to build things. We like to put up antennas, build radios, connect things. We learn about radios, electronics, and electricity. Many educators, any of you in here are teachers or ex-teachers, you'll know that getting students interested in the science, technology, engineering, and math, the STEM areas, amateur radio is one of the good ways of doing that, because they learn some math, they learn some geography, and they learn some foreign language skills while building their overall communication skills. I'm, as the intro said, I'm a good example of that. I started building radios when I was 12, and I graduated to becoming a ham when I was 15, and then went on to college at 17 to get my degree. And I attribute much of my success in my career to my early interest in ham radio. Now, a special aspect of our hobby is emergency preparedness. We've seen ham radio used extensively after natural disasters and hurricanes caused by hurricanes in, say, Texas, Louisiana, Florida, and Puerto Rico. Hams came to the aid of their country immediately after the 9/11 attacks. Many of the cell phone, landline, and emergency communication systems in New York City were down or overloaded after the attack. And so there were hams who were there trying to provide back to the fire department, police department, and other first responders to help them communicate and get information in and out of the attack area. And locally, we've had a number of instances where local hams have been called out to help to provide communications during flooding events and wildfires. Those are our two most common local disasters. And there are many rural areas where cell coverage, even in Kirk County, is poor or non-existent, or even where the police, fire, and EMS radio doesn't reach or is very spotty. So we have a motto that when all else fails, amateur radio gets through. Now, we like to help our local community, our state, and our country in times of need. We have groups who receive appropriate training to help the first responders. And locally, we have formal agreements with many of the local and national emergency agencies, including here the Red Cross chapter and the Kerr County Sheriff's Office of Emergency Management. And one of the reasons why amateur radio is so useful as a communications tool is that first, hams own their own equipment. Second, our equipment is designed to be able to be used on different frequencies and in different modes, such as voice, visual, video, digital, and our radios are much more flexible compared to the common commercial emergency communications systems that are tied to a few sets of frequencies and are only good normally for local communications and only one mode. Hams can set up their own ad hoc networks. We've been doing this for over 100 years. And when the commercial and government infrastructure goes out, hams are still there and capable of communicating locally, regionally, or around the world. Now, we own our own equipment, and many of us own generators. We have solar power backup and sometimes even wind and or battery backup. So if the grid goes out, we're ready. And we do practice annually to make sure that we have the skills and our equipment is working properly. Now, if you're interested in amateur radio, as I said, it's a simple written test. It's a 30 question test. All the answers are published. There's no guessing. Any of you airline pilots, or if any of you know, take an FAA exam, so they publish all the questions, they publish all the answers. You just have to know which are the right answers, okay? And it's the same thing with amateur radio. We want to make sure that you're safe and you know what you're doing on the air. But the initial exam is very, very straightforward and simple. As I said, even kids as young as 6 have passed it. The tests are no longer given by the FCC, so you don't have to drive down to San Antonio and sit in front of a stern-faced guy who just wants to fail you. It's done by volunteer ham radio operators who are given this privilege by the FCC. Tests are given periodically. Usually there's at least one exam being given in the metro San Antonio area every weekend. Here, our club has gone to what we call on-demand testing. So when you're ready, you call us, we get the volunteers together, and we'll even go to your own home. So you can be very comfortable, and we'll give you the exam, and you can take it there. Currently, licenses are free. There's no cost to a amateur radio license. They're good for 10 years, and they're renewable. A lot of people will pass their test simply by getting a study guide and taking some online practice exams. And some have done this in just a few days or a few weekends. Others like a more formal class. It helps them stay motivated and they can ask questions and learn more about the hobby than you can just by reading a study guide. One of the things I do is I teach licensing classes for all 3 levels of license. I usually hold these about twice a year once I get enough people signed up. And normally I don't charge for these because we look at it as a public service. If we can get more people into the hobby, that means there's more people available in case we need help during times of disaster. If you're interested, you can see me a little bit later and I'd be happy to point you in the right direction about getting licensed. How do you get started? Well, there's lots of equipment out there, everything from little walkie-talkies like this on up to very large expensive radios. It's like any hobby. If any of you are photography buffs, you can take perfectly good pictures with an iPhone, but you can also spend several thousands of dollars on a high-end SLR and all the zoom lenses and macro lenses and all that. It happens to be one of my other expensive hobbies. So, but you can spend as little as you wish. And one of the great things today is that clubs like ourselves, we own a couple of very specialized digital radios that you can log into remotely over the internet using an iPad, an iPhone, or your laptop computer. And you can be on the air using our equipment. These are called software-defined radios, the same type of radio that the military currently uses. In fact, the company that makes them is also a military contractor. And the nice thing is it doesn't cost you anything other than club membership. Our dues are $20 a year, a little ad for you. And it gives you access to this, including a tower with big beam antennas on top of it. Certainly, probably a great bargain, when you consider that the underlying equipment could be fairly expensive. So if you want to learn more, there are the handouts I passed out, the ones that are on the yellow. There's some links on there. You can go to those and learn a lot more about amateur radio. So I'll wrap it up and we'll take some questions here at the end. So amateur radio is a lifetime hobby with many facets. There's no age limit. It's a simple written exam. We communicate around the world. We participate in public service events. We help our community in time of need. And most importantly, we have fun. All right. So join in the excitement. And I'd just like to end here by saying I've had the privilege of enjoying this hobby for over 50 years, and I've seen many changes over that time span. But one thing is still constant. It's the thrill of communicating with others without boundaries. So thank you all. And any questions from the group? Yes, I'll take one over here.
So when I hear you say you can talk around the world, it's odd to me that with astronauts or orbiting the moon back in the day, they couldn't speak when they were on the other side of the moon.
Yes.
We can speak all the way around our Earth. Is there a reason why that is?
Yes, the region is something called the ionosphere. If any of you remember from high school science or maybe even college science, there's a layer of charged particles up in the atmosphere. And depending upon the time of the year, time of the solar cycle, and time of day, that layer could be heavily charged. When it's charged, it refracts the radio waves back down. So, and it can actually bounce several times because salt water, like the oceans, is a very good mirror when the radio waves are grazing at at the right angle. So you can literally bounce the radio waves around the world. I've had the unusual privilege, if you want to call it that, of actually hearing my own signal coming back to me with a slight time delay, because it's gone all the way around the world and I hear it, you know, in my radio. So yes, that's how we communicate around the world. We had another.
Are any other countries or any country restricting the operation?
The only one that has restrictions right now is North Korea. They do not allow any active amateur radio operation there. Every other country around the world is fine. I mean, you name a country, they'll almost always have active ham radio operators there. Cuba is a good example. Mainland China, et cetera. You know, there's no particular restriction. They might be a little bit careful. They don't talk about politics on the air as you might expect, but North Korea is the only one that has any serious restriction.
How do you get around the language?
Actually, it's pretty easy. If you're using Morse code or you're using a digital mode, it's almost always going to be understandable to each other. In Morse code, we use some special abbreviations that are, regardless of what language it is, it means the same thing to everybody. You know? So you don't have to be able to speak the language. In terms of on voice, almost all of the voice communications are done in what I call basic English. So you could talk to people around the world. They may not be able to carry on a nice long, half an hour conversation with you, but you can certainly give name and where you're located and some of the basics there. And some are much more better at it than others. Yes, sir.
Two things. You still have the antenna out on Shepherd Reese Road?
Yeah, that antenna has been decommissioned, but yes, we have the tower out there right now. That antenna has since been moved up to the KKHR tower off of Cedar. What is it? Trying to remember the name of the road. There's a series of towers that are over near the rest area on I-10. So we're up a little bit higher. We're up at almost 300 feet above. Yeah.
The second thing is more of a testimony. Back in the last century, when I was floating around the ocean, I was about 500 miles south of the North Pole. My father had a heart attack in Lubbock, Texas. And somehow, somewhat, we had a single sideband contact. This guy came through whatever else. I was able to talk to my father. Sure, he really was okay.
Yeah.
That was not gonna say less.
Yeah, and there's a lot of us, for example, during hurricanes, Andrew was one where I was living in Atlanta at that time, and the people were affected. There was no communications out of the South Miami area. They were devastated, but we were able to pick up some signals from ham radio operators who had basically, they'd taken a portable radio, strung a wire out of the debris around their house, and were saying, we need help, send help. So we had people from Georgia and Virginia calling, at that time, the equivalent of FEMA, and saying, you got to get some people down here because, they're hurting. They need to go to the hospital or need water or whatever. Yes, sir.
CB radio, back in the time where I had a handle. CB radios, how does that fit?
Well, ham radio operators are very proud of their call signs. My call sign is K4DG, Kilo 4 Delta Golf. And so that's what we use as our handle. In fact, I know more hams by their call sign than by their first name. Okay, it's just who we are. So that's what we use. Sir.
Are you aware of any involvement with the trying to get people out of Afghanistan?
In terms of ham radio operation, I'm not aware of it. There's been very little ham radio operation out of Afghanistan, even before the collapse of the military there. In fact, I missed an opportunity to get a station that it was a military station, was based in Afghanistan just before the fall. I was listening, but you know, they were hard to get to, very rare contact. Sir.
Coordinate with all these people with their radios and they're wanting to talk all over the world, but not talking over each other.
Well, the good thing is that with ham radio, we have some fairly wide bands that we can operate in. There's a number of different bands that the FCC has allocated to us in the US, and internationally, most other countries follow about the same pattern through treaties that are in place. And so you're not required to talk just on one frequency. You can, if somebody's on the frequency that you wanted to use, you just move off a little bit. It doesn't take much to get out of interfering with someone. So it's relatively easy to prevent the interference. Yeah, it's basically that. We have a signal we call CQ, and it means I'm seeking you. Anyone ever remember the very beginning of the movie Contact, where the protagonist was a little girl who grew up to be a radio astronomer, was calling out CQ on her ham radio. And that's what you do. You just say, I'm calling anybody. Anybody answer me. And you can also have schedules with people and, you know, say at a certain time, I will talk to you on a certain frequency.
Recently, you all erected some 60-foot towers.
Well, not. Yeah, well, we went to the county commissioners and we explained that we wanted to do more for the county in terms of emergency preparedness. We already had an agreement with the Office of Emergency Preparedness. Any of you know Doug Thomas, who runs that office. I've known him for quite a while, and he wanted us to do more for them too. The problem that we had with our station that we had over at the Red Cross is very noisy in the middle of downtown. So the county was very gracious and allowed us to use a facility that's out near the Ag Barn, the Youth Event Center. And we were able to get a tower from a member who's willing to donate it, and we've installed it out there, and it'll give us a much better range of coverage both locally and around the world. Yes, ma'am.
I have a comment and a question. Keep people from over each other could also be resolved by the worldwide time zones as well. I think, you know, because Korea is 15 hours ahead of us, so
Yep.
that might help with that. My question is, does amateur radio have any devices for people who are hearing impaired or maybe speaking impaired that allows them to use the type of airways and communications available as well, especially in emergency situations?
Yes, there's several. Let me answer the first one. You're right, because it's not so much time zone as due to propagation that changes during the day, that normally at this time of the day, I would not expect to hear anybody from Asia because of the way propagation works. Later on this afternoon, I could get on and I might be able to pick up somebody from Korea or Japan or even Australia and New Zealand. They're actually fairly easy to get these days. So yeah, even if you have a lot of people on the air, you may not necessarily be able to hear them because of propagation. In terms of devices that can help the visually impaired or the hearing impaired or even speech impaired, yes, those are available. There are text to voice converters that run off of computers that can take a digital, like a typed message, like a radio teletype kind of message, and convert it into speech. So if you can't see, it'll do that. It'll even convert Morse code to a spoken language. Although if you've learned Morse code, you just hear it anyway. You don't need to convert it to text. And then for the hearing impaired, of course, there are programs that can take speech and convert it to text, so you can see it. If it's a direct text like a radio teletype, it's no problem. It's a little bit like these dictation programs. Sometimes it's hit, sometimes it's miss in terms of how accurately it translates someone's voice. Well, the FCC will only step in if there's a complaint, all right? Or if there's some reason to think that there's something nefarious going on. Ham radio, we're not allowed to send things in undecipherable code. So if you heard somebody sending a signal and it was like, five number groups like the you used to hear back in World War II, and you've seen signal operators and they're sending little 5 number groups. Can't do that on ham radio. You can't obscure the meaning of what you're doing. So that by itself would raise some eyebrows. So I don't see it as being a big problem, but we do have amateurs who monitor the airwaves. And if someone's not behaving appropriately, which usually means talking over people when they know that they're interfering, it doesn't happen very often, but amateur radio operators have there's a few out there that just can't control themselves. One more and then
We're done.
Okay.
Will you be available for questions?
I'll be available for questions afterwards.
So-
Thank you all.
John, Bill, I know you had questions for Kilo 4 Delta Golf. And the rubber ducky will be around afterwards as well. That was in high school. So thank you, very informative. So that is pretty awesome from my old days on a Cobra handheld radio. But real quick, families in Rotary, asked Stephanie if we had anything going on. Stephanie wanted to make sure that we said congratulations to our district governor in completing the triathlon this past weekend. Anybody else that was in here that did it, congratulations. A couple of other ones. Ask y'all to please continue to pray for Becky Hutto. She's recovering from her surgery, so just please keep Becky in your thoughts and prayers. And Mark Dizdar as well. It's hope you get better, buddy. So we're behind you. At this time, I'd like to ask Secretary Jeff Winling to come up, introduce our guests.
I'd like to introduce Jeff Harris. Marta Devlin. You like that? Okay. I know we're almost out of here. That was for Weir's consumption only, by the way. Really enjoyed your briefing today. Thanks. Appreciate that. Sorry I had to run out. I got one of those phone calls that I couldn't dodge from the 202 area code. Okay. Actually, you have two guests, Tanner and Conrad.
Yeah, so this is Tanner Carlson, and he's with Belong, which is in the foster care world, basically kind of in between the states and foster care. Broke him and joining us. Yeah. Conrad Dearday, and he is Army retired and is a friend of the ranch and hopefully going to help our kids with leadership.
Conrad, you have another program there with that lashes up with veterans. Did I hear Is that correct?
Wait, military order, the world wars.
Oh, yes,
Runs a leadership conference
yes,
last summer, one at the Shriners.
yes.
Runs for a week.
Okay. And you're part of that? And you're part of that with Deb and the gang? Yeah, got it. Okay, good. Marta, you have a, yes?
Oh, yeah.
Marie?
Dave Rittenhouse is not here, but Marie Souza has joined us again today and is completing the paperwork to be a Rotarian, but wanted to make sure we introduce Marie today, so stand up.
General Walter, I guess we still haven't got your process complete, have we? I know you. Nah, not from what I've seen. Our Salvation Army captain's back from 3 different missions, and it's good to have you back with us. Yeah, I know y'all made a huge impact in Louisiana. And then, of course, he went to Vegas to go gamble later. No, he didn't. What, Atlanta and then Dallas? Yeah. Okay. Where, I guess we still need to get a badge for you, right? Yeah. And Jessica, where's Jessica? Yes, there's. Did we get your badge? No, haven't got your badge yet either. Okay. I don't have anything else other than welcome back to YouTube.
Now for the fun stuff. Since Carolyn Northcutt got up and left, Roy Boudreaux, are you wearing your pin? It's a great finish. It is. 17 was a great year. 17 was a great year. So it's if we're talking about that, so foundation giving, we put the challenge out. Thank you for everybody that's giving $100 additional. Rob, and thank you for all your work on the foundation. I know it's taxing on you. I've gotten your emails and I know it's a lot of time away from your job where you're doing this for us. So thank you. World Polio Day is going to be 10/24. I know that Ashley Phillips and Amber Thomason are working hard on our Pints for Polio. We will have more information to come on that as soon as I get it from them at the trailhead at Shriner. So it's if you haven't been to the trailhead at Shriner, it's pretty amazing. It's they have the nice little beer area in the garden. So, but not that we drink beer. So if we would, please stand and join me in the forward test. The things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? I skipped one.